I did not feed my fish. I think I ran out of one of your bags of food.
Sure.
I just didn't buy more for a while.
And the fish made it.
They made it for months.
Now they'll be healthier
Yeah.
with food,
Yeah.
you know, but your fish are doing just fine without it. And people will always want to feed them because it's part of the hobby. Aquascape makes a fish food. So many times when I see people complaining about water quality, then I'm like, well, where'd you get your fish food? Oh, Walmart. It's basically feeding your fish Cheetos, you know, all the time. So get a high quality fish food with good protein levels, probiotics to help the waste breakdown.
Yeah.
And that's part of a healthy ecosystem.
If you've ever wanted a water garden at your property, this is going to be the week for you because we have the man, the myth, the legend, Greg Wittstock of Aquascapes.
Fun to be back here. It was 2 years ago I was here the last time.
I know.
It's grown in. Shocking.
Yeah, we have a beautiful pond, as you guys know, here at the Epic Homestead.
Yes.
Thanks to Greg and his team, Ed the Pond Professor as well, who's a genius, a mastermind.
He is. He's my longest teammate. 31 years, so over 3 decades.
Wow.
We've been working together.
Yeah. So give people a primer because, you know, obviously we're on the podcast. Most people are listening to the show. Who are you and what is Aquascapes?
So I'm Greg Wittstock, the pond guy.
Yeah.
This is my 33rd year in business. I own Aquascape. I founded Aquascape as a college kid back in 1991 as a way to make some money in the summer.
Yeah.
I had built a pond, my first pond for my turtles when I was a 12-year-old kid as a hobbyist, and I went to the library. I don't know, you ever been to a library before?
Yeah, okay. I used to go there all the time.
Okay, used to, okay. But a lot of people now, the internet was replaced the library to find things, but I went to the library and all of the books and everything that I read about water gardening to build my first turtle pond in my backyard were from England, were from Japan on koi fish. And so it said to make it strong, to make it out of concrete. And so I, as a 12-year-old kid, worked with my dad and we built a concrete pond in the backyard for my 11 pet turtles that I had moved from New Jersey to Chicagoland, Illinois. And that first pond leaked, turned green, and even my prize turtles migrated away.
They just left.
They just started to walk away because that's how turtles spread their DNA. Unless you have a fenced-in yard, turtles like to roam.
Okay.
But all of those challenges led to opportunities because that became my backyard classroom. So after 2 years of trying to fix a cracked concrete pond unsuccessfly, I put a rubber liner down, an EPDM roofing liner that we cleaned up because there's algicides and talcs on it for fish grade. And that's kept the water in the pond, but now the water was turning green. And so I ended up putting in a Rubbermaid cattle trough. You've seen those 80-gallon Rubbermaid cattle troughs. That was my first biological filter. And then because my pump was sitting in the bottom of the pond and clogging, I used a garbage can and put it alongside with a laundry net to capture the debris that would fall into the pond. Instead of clogging up the pump, they would go and naturally get pulled into the debris net. And so after 7 years of ripping out and rebuilding my backyard pond as a classroom, just like your classroom here, neighbors and friends started to say, this is beautiful. And then one day, the UPS guy rang the doorbell, and of course I was putzing around in my backyard of my pond, and I said, come around back. And he turned the corner and goes, this is beautiful. How did you ever buy a house with a natural spring on it? Which I'm sure many people have asked you, where does the water come from?
Right, right. It doesn't look like it's coming from anywhere.
Yeah, they don't know where it comes from. I said, no, I built this. He says, you built it. Could you build me one? And I thought, ding, 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 ding. So as a 20-year-old kid, I remember thinking, I'm going to start a pond business. And next summer, instead of being a lifeguard, I'm going to build ponds. And I remember telling my mom and my dad I wanted to start a pond building business. And all I needed was a strong back, which I already had from playing football, a wheelbarrow and a shovel. And that Christmas, I got a wheelbarrow and a shovel beneath the Christmas tree, and Aquascape was born back in 1991. And I built 5 water features my first year and ended up coming back early for my senior year from college and building another 12 ponds. So I had built 17 water features in Chicagoland as a 21, 22-year-old kid. And then on August 2nd of 1992, these things called newspapers that people used to get ran a front page story on me, the Chicago Tribune, called Yon Golden Pond. Young landscape artist Greg Wittstock creates backyard habitats for fish and plants. And hundreds of people started calling me Kevin. Wow.
So that was the beginning. That was the explosive moment.
That was it, because I had done 17 water features and was making good money as a college kid for a summertime fun hustle. And that's when I incorporated my business, and my dad came in to help me out. And basically we became the #1 contractor in Chicagoland for building ponds. And then other contractors started hiring the pond guy as a subcontractor. And that's how I got my moniker, the pond guy, from other contractors. And that's when the genesis came up with, what if I actually were able to manufacture the products that I was MacGyvering up and Jimmy rigging
because they were all kind of makeshift at the time.
Garbage cans and cow troughs.
Yeah.
Just like most hobbyists do things.
Yeah.
And that's when I ended up filing. I got at 23, I got a patent, my first patent for my skimmer and biofalls. You don't have a skimmer here; you just have a vanishing edge, recirculator. But you have a biofalls, which was a cattle trough, the original one that came out there, and ended up manufacturing. And in 1995, started selling those all over the country.
Wow!
And that was really, we were the first manufacturer of professional grade products to contractors in the water gardening industry. And to this day, 3 decades later, we are the only manufacturer of water feature products that actually builds water features.
I see. So everyone else makes product, doesn't install the product.
It's all made on a CAD program and an engineer's thing where we are actually tinkering up in the field and seeing how we can. And so now my goal, and even looking at your pond today, how can we improve it? So we talked about color changing lights, and we talked about the ion jet and little things that we could do. So my goal now is to improve the consumer's experience with water features.
Yeah.
And I have a great time because I get to travel around the world and visit my best customers' ponds, or their best customers' ponds, so the end consumers, and then showcase it to the world through my channel, Greg Wittstock, the Pond Guy. Yeah.
But there's a thing you always say that I'd love for you to explain. You talk about living the Aquascapes lifestyle.
Yep.
And to me, I go like, is that just a slogan? Like, what does that mean? To me, it speaks to I think living an epic gardening lifestyle, or living the life of a gardener, right? And it seems like you have something kind of similar there.
The lifestyle is what we're doing right now.
Yeah.
So we're sitting 30 feet, 40 feet from your waterfalls, and I hear it.
Yeah.
And it just creates that kind of Zen atmosphere, the sound of water. I think that every garden is incomplete without water. Water is a source of all life. All of the pollinators that need it, all the birds will come down. It changes a space. There's nothing. This is a big, bold statement. Epic gardening.
I'm ready for it.
Is welcome to push back on there. There's nothing that you can do in a garden that will change the space more than a decorative water feature.
You heard it. I don't know that I would agree.
Let's go.
But I do agree that I will say this.
Yes.
When I heard you talk Aquascapes lifestyle, but you're a bombastic guy, you're an outspoken guy, I go, is it just like hype? Like what is going on? And then we do the pond, right? And then the pump turns on for the first time, and then it starts to cycle. The biofall starts to activate, and then it falls into my vanishing edge. Because for my pond guys who are listening, there's an underground reservoir where all the water returns to. So you really can't see where the water's coming from or going. And then especially now that it's more landscaped in. I mean, I'll tell you, this past weekend, my girlfriend and I, we spent most of the weekend outdoors by the pond, in the sun, taking a little nap, relaxing. We actually had our first grill session on our outdoor fire pit out here. We cooked over the open flames next to the pond, right? And so there's definitely something to be said for the peacefulness of the running of the water.
Yes.
Like that, something about that sound, I think, maybe it's how we evolved. We're just used to hearing it, and it comforts us.
It brings a garden to life. We actually are so bold as to say a water feature turns a house into a home. It will impact that space. There's nothing that you could put in that space that will have more of a dramatic impact. Yeah. Because even when we're not in that space, 30, 40 feet away, we're hearing that space, right? And then it will attract the birds. It'll attract the pollinators. The fish become your pets. Yeah. First thing when we walked up, we looked at the fish, look at how much bigger they're gotten. It's like your pet. Yeah. Right? So, but a water garden is incomplete without the plants. You need aquatic plants. Yeah. It can't stand alone. We create a big berm for your waterfalls, which has done a phenomenal job. You've done a phenomenal job planting it. There's so many aspects of and it's always changing. So the evolution of a garden is always going to, but I was here 2 years ago and it's so much more filled in now. Yeah. And it's been in there, is it this year 4?
This might be year 3, I think.
Okay, year 3.
This is year 3.
So that this is the year to really pop, right? Year 1 sleep, year 2 creep, year 3 leap. And that's what's happening around your pond. And it looks so natural. It looks like it's always been there. Yeah.
That's the crazy part is when you break the edge of the border, like I have some feather grass kind of spilling over. Because it is not a real pond in the sense of it's not naturally occurring. Yep. And so there is that liner peak up sometimes, or there's sometimes little edges. And then when you start filling that in with the planting, it just vanishes and it looks completely real.
What we say is a good gardener to a gardener, we want to not know where the water ends and the land begins.
Yeah, exactly.
So we don't want to, so many people do the thing like the flagstones around the edge. Yeah. And then there's we call it a ring of pearls look. You want to vary the sizes of the rock. You want to vary the textures. You want to vary the plant material, both aquatic and terrestrial. and the combination of two. So the whole concept between living the aquascape lifestyle is not just the water feature, but everything else that it entails. Nothing, these are big grandiose statements that I'm saying, but nothing will draw somebody more outside for longer hours on end than a water feature. So when you and your girlfriend, you're sitting by the pond, you're looking at the fish, you're watching the birds come down and bathe in the stream. It's all encompassing. And of course, our goal is to get people outside into the garden.
Yeah.
Right. So living the aquascape lifestyle, the pond is the foundation, but the lifestyle is all that else it entails: the outdoor living space, the patio, the garden around it.
What's been a lot of joy for us is because that natural stream kind of trickles off. So there's shallow spots, there's deeper spots, there's lily pads for smaller birds to land on, et cetera. We've noticed different patterns throughout the seasons, right? So like, right now, maybe a little bit earlier than now, like January, February, there'll be crows, and the crows will be bathing in the pond, right? And then right now, it's like all the spring birds will be flitting about, hummingbirds. When my girlfriend had a dog, she passed away recently, but she used to kind of just sit in that little return stream and just cool herself off. And and so, as
and drink the water.
And drink the
because
water.
The dogs love pond water. If you put a bowl down next to a dog and you put a pond, 100% of the dogs will go for the pond.
They go for the pond, yeah. And it was interesting because she had her dog died of a type of cancer, and when that's coming, you want to give your dog the best life that you can give it in those final days. And she was just kind of hanging out by the pond, relaxing, kind of soaking up the sun and stuff. And it was a great end of life that we would not have had without that, right? And so it just brings a lot of joy. And I think, to me, I think garden first, you think pond first, right? And so I think of the pond as an extension of the garden. You probably think in the reverse.
I do.
And it makes sense because we both stand from different points.
So, but both are incomplete. A garden is incomplete without water, and a water feature cannot stand alone without the garden. And so the whole premise between living the aquascape lifestyle is how it really draws people outside, puts them into their garden, and then when they're sitting there and they get bit by a mosquito, they add a gazebo. Yeah. Or they are always, a water feature is also never done.
Right.
So when we come out and we see that you have older lights, I said, well, let's upgrade you to color changing lights. Yeah. Let's put an auto doser, even though your pond has never been cleaned in 3 years that it's been in.
Looks pretty good, right?
It looks really good. It's well maintained, and the plant material, I was like, either the pots are really big or the plant has leaped, and the tubers have leaped over. Yeah. So now they're rooting in the gravel. But this fall, when it dies back in November or December, let's come out and do a clean out on it.
Let's do it.
But the other nice thing, the reason that you've gone 3 years without doing a clean out is you run that thing 365 days of the year and you're in San Diego. Most people aren't as blessed in their area to have the perfect mild climate for 365. Yeah. So they usually do an annual clean out. We've gone 3 years without one. I think for starting year 4, we'll do one.
Yeah, makes sense. We talked, I think a year ago when you were out, and you said something like, the pond is a Ferrari, but you've got it in like the body of a minivan.
I don't mince words.
Something like that. Yeah, I appreciate it. And so, it got us thinking, and we had tried to establish some stuff, but frankly, I'm better at edible gardening. I'm not as good at landscape pond gardening. So it took us a couple stops and starts. I think now we're in a good spot, but if someone does have a water feature, whether they build it themselves, they've got something from Aquascape, maybe something a little smaller, how do you start thinking about the principles? Because I think the thing that's interesting about the way you guys do ponds is they look real. Yeah. They look like look natural. So thus the planting around them, to me, wants to be natural, right? Maybe you want to use some natives, or you want to use like break patterns, make it look very authentic. Yeah. And so how does someone approach that?
Well, landscaping will make or break a water feature. So you can build a beautiful Taj Mahal, but if you put pink flamingos around it, or you put, little plants that don't match the size or shape or texture, it will destroy it. And so for me, what's hard for me to take is knowing the potential of what it could look like, and then somebody being two left thumbs when they're planting it. Now, of course, this is how people learn. This is good. But there's some principles that you would want to go off of. And one of the biggest one to start with, is that you don't want to know where the water ends and the land begins. So you want plants that will obviously, both aquatic and terrestrial, that will soften up the borders of the hard stone, that covers the liner. And so many people kind of miss that, where you'll see a defined border all the way around. When I looked at your pond, the first thing I noticed, was you got the blooming irises growing on the sides, you've got the grasses, you've got, junipers, where you would soften up, and creeping jenny, all sorts of different plants to soften up the borders. Yeah. And then vertical elevation. So when you look at your waterfalls right behind, I'm not sure, is that a clematis? What is behind it?
It's a passion fruit vine covering my rainwater capture tank.
Oh, that's right. That rainwater capture.
You can't even see it anymore. Yeah.
I remember it from the last time I was here. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's a vertical elevation that keeps your eyes centered on the foreground.
Mhm.
You know, so if we put in a waterfalls and then you look right at the neighbor's, you know, kitchen window behind it, no, let's put some grasses, let's put some pine trees.
Yeah.
Let's put, you know, something that, you know, on top of a rainwater harvesting.
That's a piece that you had told me last year that I took to heart, because the passion fruit vine has now completely covered that 5,000 gallon cistern. So to the point where Kurt, who came out on your team, he was like, what's behind that? What's that on? He didn't even know it was on something.
Yeah.
And then we also put in a Pride of Madeira, which is pretty vigorous growing, like beautiful blue spired flowering plant.
Yes.
In the back, underneath, like right where the fence is, right? So there's this big sort of 2-story house behind that pond. And I was trying to do whatever I could to kind of block a little bit of that off.
You've done an amazing job, shockingly.
Yeah.
Not. You've done an amazing job. And subsequently, it just highlights the beautiful piece of artwork that you have.
Yeah.
And we call it art. And when you hire a certified aquascape connoisseur, every artist is different. Their interpretation of art is different. You know, there could be a contemporary element. You can do a formal edge. You can do fountain, you know, features, which, by the way, just on a side note, I'm sitting here thinking, I got this beautiful sound on my left. Wouldn't it be nice to have a small fountain on my right somewhere? I haven't even looked, but some sort of another sound element to just kind of balance things out in the yard. And soundscaping is a real thing.
It's a real thing.
You know, I live in Utah right now, and we live with beautiful mountains in the back, but there's a highway back there. And I'm already, when we have our window open at night, you can hear some of the traffic, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to put a small fountain below that window, and that sound will mask, that white sound will mask the noise of the street behind me. So there's different elements, but when it comes to the landscaping, you want to do vertical elevations to stop the eyes, which you've done, and you also want to do edge treatments with aquatics as well as terrestrials so that you don't know where that border is.
So what I did kind of on accident is I was trying to root watercress from seed, and I actually just put it in the rim of that biofilter.
That will grow watercress.
Yeah, and so it started to really grow, and my whole goal was just to tuck it in one little corner. But I just kind of forgot about it for about a month or so, and watercress, obviously, being an aquatic plant, or can be aquatic, it grows really fast in a pond, because you've got the fish, fertilizing. It's basically an aquaponic system. And so what happened is the watercress cycled through its life cycle. So it started to flower and the seeds dispersed. And of course, with a flowing pond, it kind of flowed, found
very
little,
invasive.
Yeah, found little crevices. And then every, I would say 2 or 3 months, we have to do a big rip and replace of the watercress. But it's effectively a terrestrial and or aquatic plant. It could do either, but it crevices itself right in that border and just obfuscates that liner.
It's beautiful.
It perfectly covers the liner.
You just got to periodically weed your pond with that.
And we actually made, we did an episode on the Homesteading channel where we ripped the good water, because sometimes the watercress, like, it gets spent pretty quickly, to go yellow. So we grabbed some of the good bright green stuff and we made a watercress soup out of the pond. We called it a pond soup.
I remember hearing that. I remember seeing that. Have you ever done any impatiens in the water?
No, I haven't.
So you got a little bit, maybe too much sun here, although, you know, in the morning, certainly not. You might want to try a few impatiens to plant in there as well. And maybe it will outcompete some of the areas that the watercress grows. And it's amazing when you are constantly having that drip irrigation of that water, that slow moving water, the impatiens just explode. Yeah, I mean, it's really cool because it's not that big a deal, I guess, if something gets overgrown in the pond itself. Because it's not really rooted in much of anything at all. It's sort of just floating. Like those roots, the watercress, when you pull them out, there's just tons of beautiful white roots floating in water, right? And so it's not as annoying as some of the weeding that I have to do here. A little hack that we do is we'll actually use a woman's stocking, you know, and actually take the right out of the tray and plant in the spring the impatiens right in there with a little bit of aquatic soil and put them into the rocks, and then in a few months it starts just to go. Giant.
And if you ever need to rip it out, you can just take the stocking out.
Bingo. Well, we do, especially where they're annuals, you know.
One of the things that I never thought I would like as much as I do is having fish. I mean, I grew up with dogs. I was always fascinated by the natural world. I never kept fish, except for I think my brother had a betta fish. And he killed it when we were younger. So I've got koi. I've lost a few over the years, unfortunately. I kind of learned my lesson with some techniques. Maybe we'll talk about how to protect your fish. But why don't we just start out with, are koi the fish for a pond? Or, you know, would you recommend other ones for a beginner?
I would say that koi and goldfish, but kind of koi are the creme de la creme. Goldfish, you know, people go to PetSmart and get them, but there's a whole world around koi. They're called the, Nishiki koi, the living jewels, and it's living artwork, you know, and people really get into the koi. Now, I love goldfish, I love shabunkins, but really koi are kind of the Ferrari of the pond.
So I've seen you on your YouTube channel And actually, I think I saw you with Coral Fish 12G.
Oh, George.
George.
Yes. In Japan.
In Japan.
Yes.
I watched this episode on maybe his channel, maybe your channel. I don't remember which, but you guys went into Japan.
Yeah.
And you went to some like probably world-class koi breeders, right?
It's unbelievable. So in Nagata, Japan, which is the koi capital of the world, and I've been there a couple times now. Planning on going again this year. Every other year I go to Japan and go to visit the Mecca for koi.
Yeah.
But there's dealers from all over the world. They are in Asian culture. Koi are considered good luck.
Mm-hmm.
So as Indonesia and some of the countries come into more wealth, a koi pond is kind of like
it's like the thing.
You've arrived.
Yeah.
When you have your koi, and I like koi. I would even say I love koi, but I just love how they're just part of an entire beautiful pond recipe.
Yeah.
And so it's one element of a beautiful water feature is the fish. And koi is by far the most popular of those.
Yeah. What I did, you rank my strategy.
Okay.
What I did is when I first got the pond, I was overexcited. I wanted something in there. Mm-hmm. Right. So it cycled for a little bit, it kind of stabilized, whatever. And then I went to Petco.
Sure.
Right. And I did not buy koi there. I adopted 2 koi that someone had left there. They had some program like that. Because to me, when I looked at them, and it's probably my untrained eye, I was like, well, they look a little more unique than the standard ones that are at Petco. Maybe I'm getting lucky. Like maybe it's one of these more fancy koi. And I tossed, I think it was 2 at the time. And frankly, at this point, I think I've lost 3 koi total, and I'm not sure which 3 I lost because one of your guys came through.
But that's fine. And the nice thing is that they were probably inexpensive koi. You probably paid $5 or $10 each.
They were $2 each.
There you go.
$2 each because I think it was an adoption thing.
Sure,
right?
Sure. So people could say it's kind of like a purebred dog versus a mutt, or whatever else. But I mean, koi is the most expensive fish in the world.
Is it?
Yes. Okay. So people have spent for breeders, for all Japan show champions, multiple millions of dollars for a fish.
One fish?
Yes.
Wow.
Or you can go to PetSmart and get one for $2.
Yeah.
That could technically grow up to be a grand champion, but probably not because the ones that are grand champions, it's a genetic.
I saw something about this where I know we're getting deep on the koi, but it's fascinating to me where they'll have these breeding pools and then they just winnow down the genetic line by eye almost, right?
So it's called culling.
Yeah.
And only 1 in 10 fish actually makes it to adulthood because they cull it out starting when they're very little, 2 weeks old, for looking for color schemes. Because of course, koi are just carp.
Yeah.
And their rootstock is a dark, carp looking fish. And so they've obviously over the years perfected, especially in Japan, breeding and the different color varieties.
Yeah.
And so to achieve that continued success, they obviously cull the babies, for the first 2 or 3 months, and then only the ones that have the closest non-traditional colors make it to the market.
I see. Okay, so let's turn from koi for a second. So if someone wants koi and they have a pond in their backyard or water feature,
well, how about let me flip it on you with this.
Let's go.
Everybody wants fish. They just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
So the number one thing that people say is, well, I don't want to mess with the fish. I don't want to do. I said, then don't.
Yeah.
If you go out of town for a week and there was no helpers here at this place, your fish would be just fine living on the algae and living on the insects in the pond. But here's what I already know. I already know they're going to love their fish so much they're going to feed them, and they're going to. And then when the fish breed, they're going to want to make their pond bigger because they're not going to want to get rid of any of them, or they're going to give some to their friends. So it's a very addictive part of the hobby is the fish.
Well, in the world of gardening and homesteading, you have chickens, right? And there's something called chicken math, where the math never adds up because you always want more, right? And it's honestly it's very similar with koi. Sure. And with fish, so I have a couple questions. So I have koi. I have about 6, I think.
Yep.
And then I threw in, I forgot the species name, but they're commonly called mosquito fish, the ones that'll eat, little guys, and you can get those for free.
Sure, mosquito fish, yeah.
And then I bought a couple loaches, like a freshwater loach.
Okay.
Which, and I'll get back to that in a second. And I think I also bought a blue crawdad.
Ooh.
Something like that.
Okay.
Right? Now, I have no idea where the loach and crawdad are in the pond. I've never seen them since the day I put them in. Are they dead?
Possibly, but possibly not.
Yeah.
Your lilies are doing really well.
Yeah.
And, it could just be, ecosystem balancing itself out.
Yeah.
But the crawdads will tend to eat the lilies.
I see. Okay.
So
the crawdad could have just maybe not made it and it's degraded.
Maybe not made it, or it's just an ecosystem. It's in balance. It eats enough and it grows. When people use native species, out here, a loach in Chicago, a loach would never make it in the winter. But out here in the mild San Diego, it's probably cool enough even in the wintertime that it survives. So it blends in.
Yeah.
So the loaches are hiding in the gravel.
Because it's a sucker fish. And I've seen like in like a standard aquarium, they'll say keep an eye on your filter because your loach will just get stuck.
When we do a clean out, it'll be interesting to see what we find.
That would be fascinating. Yeah. Because I have this fantasy basically of if we do a clean out, I'm going to find like a crawdad this big now, just hiding under. Because when my pond was built, Ed put sort of a rock shelf in, and there's a big underhang. Yes. And there's also a big like sort of fish hole. Yeah,
it's a fish cave for predators. For herons or whatever.
So who knows? I've never looked in there. I have no idea what's in there.
What would be interesting when we do our clean out in November or December at the kind of the coolest time of the year for here? We should put in an underwater cam.
That'd be
fish
cool.
cam.
Yeah.
That you could just stream to your social media or whatever and get images.
That'd be very cool.
Yeah, but then you would see what's going on. You could see when the fish breed. You could see if the crawdad walks by or the loaches. But we'll put an underwater camera when we put it in.
Okay, we'll do that for sure. So any things that someone should consider with fish, just basic primers.
Yeah. So one thing is not to use native fish.
Okay.
Because you won't see them. So many times we talk to, I want to put a pond and put bass and bluegill. Yeah, they'll hide under the leaves in the caves.
Yeah.
You'll never see them. Where koi are interactive. Koi have personalities. Interesting. The fish have different personalities. You'll see ones that have different behaviors. Some will eat out of your hands. Different types of things. So the number one thing that I want to say with fish is you want them because they're part of the ecosystem. Mm-hmm. So when we're establishing an ecosystem, you need fish to kind of balance things out. If they would, your plant material, you have some floating plants in there, they would take off if you didn't have fish in there to eat the duckweed.
What's interesting is I did not feed my fish. I think I ran out of one of your bags of food. Sure. I just didn't buy more for a while.
And the fish made it.
They made it for months.
Yeah.
Months. And I started going like, am I breaking the laws of physics? Like how are they surviving?
So now technically if you had, just like an ecosystem, if you had too many fish, they would balance themselves out eventually. But you only had 6 fish. You had a nice sized pond. You had
good amount of algae,
plant material, good amount of algae.
Insects,
so the fish will be fine. Now they'll be healthier with food. Yeah. But your fish are doing just fine without it, and people will always want to feed them because it's part of the hobby.
Well, we started feeding them this year more actively, more on routine, and they're huge now
because they're getting a supplemental food.
Yeah.
I would just use a probiotic food. Mm-hmm. So Aquascape makes a fish food. So many times when I see people complaining about water quality, then I'm like, well, where'd you get your fish food? Oh, Walmart. Yeah. Well, it's basically feeding your fish Cheetos, all the time. So get a high quality fish food with good protein levels, probiotics to help the waste breakdown. Yeah. And that's part of a healthy ecosystem.
Got it. If you've been convinced, and I've been reconvinced, even though I do have a pond, on getting some more water in my space, more water features. Yeah. But let's just say, maybe I live in a townhouse or I live in a small home and I don't have the space right now to put in a big pond.
Yes.
How would someone get started?
Well, speaking of townhouses, I remember when my mom moved into a townhouse and she, of course, we had grown up with our pond in our backyard and she wanted the pond. And the only spot, Kevin, that I could put it was underneath her deck. Her wooden deck.
Oh, wow.
And I put in, and we actually called it the Snoopy pond because it looked like a, Snoopy, but it was a 6 foot by 8 foot space that I put a water garden in with. Didn't put koi in there. I put shabunkins, which is, type of goldfish in there. And it became, and you could hear it from the top of the patio, and she put the deck, but she put a small patio next to it. And underneath her deck in a 6 foot by 8 foot spot, she had a beautiful sound of a water garden. She had some fish. Didn't have any lilies because it was too shady for the lilies. That was the only missing element that we didn't have in there. We had some other aquatic plants, but no lilies. And I fit underneath in a townhome underneath the deck.
Wow.
So I've never been to a yard that I couldn't figure out how to fit a water feature into.
If someone wants to do this, okay, so let's just paint an extreme case. I'm back at my old house, right? Okay, I lived kind of in downtown San Diego. Yep. And I had a small front yard garden. Yep. That's about it. And everything else was concrete.
Yep.
What's like the sort of the most compact water feature I could build?
At your old place, I would have put in a small fountainscape.
Okay.
So whether it was a stacked slate urn or a sphere or even Mongolian basalt rocks that are drilled out with the core, because of the sound that it would create, especially in an urban environment where you're on a street, right? So, and water changes that space, so that sound changes that space. So the easiest, simplest, most foolproof way and most compact thing you can do is a fountainscape.
Okay.
A small fountainscape with a bubbling sound and the noise.
Meaning no like pond basin, right? It's a recirculating fountain.
It's a recirculating, everything's buried under the ground, but then you have the sound of water.
Yeah.
The next step up is pondless waterfalls.
Okay.
So it is the sound of water.
Mm-hmm.
It's a natural looking waterfalls and pond, but there's no aquatic life in it. You don't have fish. You don't have aquatic plants in there. You might have some plants that like irises, marginal bog plants.
And what kind of footprint would that one be? Pondless waterfall.
We have built pondless waterfalls that are as small as just a small basin and 6 foot long stream and waterfalls. Mm-hmm. That's a very typical one that we would put in. And then of course you can build a giant pondless waterfalls too. Mm-hmm. But in terms of level of expertise required to build it, and in terms of challenges in terms of maintenance, a fountainscape is virtually nothing. You could put it on a timer. Mm-hmm. You could have a switch on a pondless waterfall or a timer, flip it on or off. An ecosystem pond, which is the top level, which is what you have right here, that would require the most amount of TLC, even though this is not a lot of TLC because we put a good balance in, which is part of the beautiful pond recipe. You need to have the fish, the plants, the rocks and gravel, the filtration, and the pump and plumbing all in balance. Yeah. So many times when I see somebody having green water or somebody having a high maintenance water feature, it's because they don't have any rock and gravel substrate for the bacteria to grow in. They don't have aquatic plants to shade the light. Yeah. They don't have the right size recirculatory system so that the pump isn't pulling enough water and recirculating the pond. So these are all things that people can avoid. But when you're just looking at a small space and making an impact with water, fountainscapes is the easiest way.
Okay. And a fountainscape is something that I could buy and build myself pretty easily. Yeah.
It's not complicated. You need to dig a hole, so there's some elbow grease involved.
Sure.
But the plumbing is simply, you can just screw on the plumbing with a rubber clamp, and then you top it off when you're out there gardening, or you can put a fill valve on it and you just top off the water.
Okay. And then, so, it's interesting you say the ecosystem approach or the ecosystem pond.
Yep.
When I first started working with you guys, it resonated with me because as my gardening journey has evolved, I went from kind of, call it like brute forcing the garden, where you're in maybe only containers, synthetic fertilizers, this is way back in the day, hydroponics, let's call it, which I still love the method, but there's no denying that it's a 100% human way of growing.
Yes.
It's a completely manufactured way of growing. And then as we sit around here in the backyard, you look at these are my marginals, like my flowers that are drawing in some hoverflies that are attacking a particular pest. And so when I build the ecosystem, then I don't have to do as much work because the ecosystem itself self-regulates. And that's why I was so attracted when I was talking with Ed, who put in this pond. Yep. He was like, oh, well, I was like, well, what happens if it goes green? He's like, well, it might for a little bit, but then it'll stabilize because we did this, right? And it's similar to over here where it's like, how often do I have to water? Well, less if you're mulching correctly in your garden, right? It's the same sort of idea.
Correct. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Most people, when they get sick, go to the doctor, and the doctor says, eat better, start exercising, and stop smoking, and they say, give me a pill.
Yeah.
So chemicals are a pill, okay? But if you put the right foundation in there, if you're not overweight, if you're eating correctly, if you're not smoking, you can build a very sustainable ecosystem with very minimal impact. You've had a water feature here for 3 years, and you haven't cleaned it once.
I haven't cleaned it once, and frankly, the first year, I had a bout of string algae that got kind of bad for once, and I did a big, I actually took a rake and just raked it all out.
And that's great fertilizer.
Yeah, great fertilizer. We actually threw it in the compost. And then as the years have gone on, I would say this last year, it's been the most beautiful it's been, but also the most problem-free, even though there's actually way more stuff interacting, which makes sense, right? That it's more regulation.
We say ponds are like puppies.
Yeah.
Year 1 is harder than year 2. And by year 3, you should have that dog fully trained and dialed in. So it takes about 3 years to fully establish an ecosystem and get a pond up and running. And now you're off and going.
Yeah, it's amazing. Well, it's been amazing having you on the show. Guys, if you want to see more with Greg, you can, of course, check his channel out. But we're doing a couple episodes on our homesteading channel. And who knows, you might even see a pond at Jacques' place. But I can't make any promises. Hit him up on his channel and try to persuade him. Stay tuned. Good luck in the garden and keep on growing.